Good day, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. It is indeed an honor to be here today to present my presentation to you regarding the crippling effects of ableism in the Philippines. But before I proceed with my presentation, I would like to just thank the organizers of this event for giving me the opportunity to do this and to put the Filipino people in the global light. So before I start again with my presentation, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Zendy Victoria Su Valencia, and I am a Filipino woman living with a disability in the Philippines. I have cerebral palsy and glaucoma, and I have had those since I was born. So I know the experience of the Filipino PWD, and I have been advocating for it since for such a long time. Okay, so to be here today is indeed an honor for me because I get to represent people like me and people from my country. To start with my presentation today, let me read the title for you. I'm going to be talking about crippling ableism and giving you a discourse on the abled misrepresentations and displacements of persons with disabilities in the Philippines. The main goal of this discourse is to perhaps shed light on the situation of the Filipino PWD and to give them a global identity. Let's start first with an outline. What could you expect from my talk today? First, I will talk to you about the disability in the Philippine context. I will give you a background on Philippine laws and jurisprudence regarding the persons with disabilities. I will shed a quick light on an introduction to ableism and the stigma and ableism in the Philippines. I have also provided some situational applications through interviewing some persons with disabilities with their consent. So I will be giving narrative articulations regarding the situational applications of ableism in the Philippines. And I will also end my talk by giving you recommendations as to how we can counteract ableism. We begin with defining disability, although it is a very basic place to start since all of us here must be well versed or have some or very extensive experience advocating and studying disability. However, I believe that it is a good place to start. So let's talk about what disability means. First, a physical and mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that impairs, interferes with, or limits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks or actions, or participate in typical daily activities and interactions. Second, we can define disability as a physical, sensory, psychological, or neurological deviation that results in reduced functioning. Third, disability can be caused by an illness, injury, or condition that makes it difficult for someone to do things that other able people can do, and that is usually permanent or lasts for a long time. Let's talk about disability in my country. What is it really like to be a Filipino with a disability? In the Philippines, disability is one of the issues that affects a portion of a population. However, to ensure the equality and rights of persons with disabilities, there are laws and policies that were put in place for the welfare of the Filipino disabled. The NCDA, or the National Council on Disability Affairs, is the governing body that focuses on the activities and concerns related to PWDs in the country. And December 3rd is considered the International Day of Persons with Disabilities in the Philippines and is held to advocate for the rights and privileges of Filipino PWDs. About 16 individuals per 1,000 of the country's population has a disability in the Philippines. In the Philippines also, of the 92.1 million people, there are around 1.4 million living with a disability. So you can see that disability is something that is quite prevalent in my country. And while there are laws, as I have said, a lot of these laws are not being put into place properly, and a lot of these laws can still be improved. And that is one of the issues that I'm going to tackle later on in my discourse. For the rights of the Filipino disabled, the government has put into place RA 72772, or the Magna Carta for Disabled Persons. This is an act providing rehabilitation, self-development, and self-reliance of PWDs and their integration in the mainstream society and for other purposes. So I have given here a rundown of what to expect when we read this document. First, it outlines the rights and privileges of Filipino PWDs, such as equal opportunity for employment, vocational guidance and counseling, access to quality education, assistance in schools, access to special education, special health services, and social services. So as you can see in this infographic that I have actually given to us or provided for us, the Magna Carta for PWDs talks about rights and privileges concerning health, accessibility, auxiliary social services, education, telecommunications, employment, and political and civil rights. So when we talk about health, this particular document or law ensures that all PWDs are cared for or have adequate access to healthcare benefits and affordable healthcare. Supposedly, that's what this bill is supposed to do for them. Another thing that it lobbies for is accessibility. It says that the state should ensure the attainment of a barrier-free environment that will enable PWDs to have access to public and private buildings and establishments. Later on, I will show you the true situation in my country. Auxiliary social services will provide the necessary services so that PWDs can have or restore social functioning and participation in community affairs. This is to prevent isolation, and this is to integrate PWDs into mainstream society. The Magna Carta also lobbies for fair education, fair and adequate education for each Filipino PWD, in order for them to be able to access or nurture their opportunities and their skills. Others include also telecommunications and employment. With regards to employment, Magna Carta says that no PWD shall be denied access, opportunities, and access and opportunities for suitable employment. Lastly, that the PWD will have the right to suffrage or equal political and civil rights. He or she will be allowed to vote or have a choice in voting in national and local elections and will be assisted should need be. These are the promises that the Magna Carta for the Filipino PWD states. This is what it states. However, I want to show you through my talk how these particular promises are actually and sadly unmet. So the prohibitions of this Magna Carta It prohibits the discrimination on employment. It states that each PWD will actually have equal right to fair employment depending on their skills. It also prohibits discrimination on transportation, meaning that there will be a preferential option for Filipino PWDs when it comes to riding public transport. And it also prohibits the discrimination on the use of public accommodations and services. This particular document or law also amends additional privileges, such as the existence of the 20% discount card for both disabled people and senior citizens, and also provisions for express lanes, educational assistance, and the fact that each PWD should be treated as dependents under the Revenue Code. This also protects the PWDs from vilifications and public ridicule, or what we would popularly call bullying. However, what is the reality faced by the PWD in this day and age in the Philippines? As told by myself, an advocate, a woman, and a person with a disability. Let me tell you the reality. Despite the fact that there are laws in place, stigmatization is still very rampant in my country, sadly, or sad to say. So let's define what stigma is first. Stigma refers to attitudes and beliefs that lead people to reject, avoid, or fear those they perceive to be different. Stigmatization is the social process of devaluation, stating that people devalue themselves because of some marks or characteristics they have or appear to have. So, for example, in the case of a person with a disability in the Philippines, he or she might be discriminated against for his or her existing conditions. He or she might be stigmatized for the wounds or scars that he might have from his disability experience. He or she might be ostracized because of his inability to cope with the demands of the able-bodied world. And I know that this reality is also very, very present globally or worldwide. But speaking as a Filipino, it is rather rampant as well in my own country. And of course, because this is rampant, okay, it gives rise to ableism. So a definition of ableism, how do we find it? Ableism refers to bias, prejudice, and discrimination against people with disabilities, and it hinges on the idea that people with disabilities are less valuable than non-disabled people. It frames normality as the ideal and disability as an abnormality or a flaw. So, in an abled society, we would expect that those who are disabled would be put on one side or separated from those who are able. So there is an existing marginalization that occurs that would isolate those who are disabled from those who are able. And sadly, in the Philippines, the disabled or those who are physically impaired are considered the minority and therefore are marginalized. So, truth be told, I've never really thought of speaking about ableism before in any of my other advocacy works or in any of my other talks concerning disability. But I'm very happy to be putting this topic on the table because I don't think any other disability scholar in the Philippines has paid heed to this. So when I started studying it recently, I said, this is something that I would like to sort of subspecialize in. How exactly in my country is ableism framed? Okay, or how does it affect the already rampant discrimination faced by people like us? And this is my very first actually attempt at answering these questions. Let's talk about the types of ableism before I go to my narrative articulations or my situational articulations. Institutional ableism talks about how ableism in institutions affects a PWD, or how ableism in turn affects institutions such as schools, workplaces, okay, public places, places of public domain, where people with disabilities would run the risk of being misrepresented or misunderstood, or worse, okay, not paid any heed at all. It talks about how society sees disability as something that needs to be fixed, okay, and not something that just simply exists as a reality of life or as a reality of the world. So oftentimes, people with a disability are viewed as broken or something that needs to be fixed or put together again, instead of something or someone that is welcomed in a society. And this is very rampant in institutions. You would actually feel the discrimination that emanates because of institutional ableism. Secondly, interpersonal ableism. Interpersonal ableism has to do with social interactions concerning disability. So how is ableism being talked about, okay, in society? How does ableism affect social interactions? How well does the abled community understand the reality of their disabled counterparts or impaired counterparts? What language does disability have in my country? What kind of language do we use to refer to people like us who have disabilities in our country? How does ableism, or how does language actually shape ableism, and how can we eradicate this ableism in language in order for us to somehow build a more accepting community and in turn a more accepting world? Okay, that all is under interpersonal ableism. Third, both institutional and interpersonal ableism, if not fixed or addressed, can actually cause the PWD or person with a disability to turn on him or herself, and this will give rise to internal ableism. Internal ableism. Internal ableism has to do with a PWD being ashamed of himself and fostering a mindset that they might not have or they might not be good enough. And therefore, they hold themselves to impossibly high standards to fit into ableist societies. Personally, we are what society tells us we are, or we do what society tells us we can do. So if institutions tell us, for example, that we cannot do something or that we are limited due to our disability, and social situations label us all as something inferior or as people who are inferior despite our abilities, then internal ableism will be birthed from that. We as PWDs, if we don't stand up to these three types of ableism, will not be able to rise. And if we're not able to rise, then we give birth to internal ableism. We start to understand or believe that we simply cannot do what the able-bodied people can do. And we tend to push ourselves to impossibly high standards. Honestly, when I was really young, this is what happened to me. Okay, I was told, because you are disabled or because you are different from those who are able, you have to work much harder than anyone. And that really, really, really pushed me too hard. It gave birth to a lot of internal ableisms. However, through time, I was able to work through it and sublimate it into something as beautiful as this to advocate for other people who are like me. So let's talk about how institutional, interpersonal, and internal ableism affects the Filipino PWD. What is it like in our country? First of all, while I was studying this phenomenon of ableism, I wanted to talk about, or I was stricken or stricken with the language used to refer to people with disabilities. Being a writer myself, or being a language person myself, I'm a writer and I teach languages at the university. I understand how languages actually shape the consciousness of a society and in turn a nation. So the language that we use, or the words that we use, or the things that we choose to believe, or what language causes us to believe, is what a society will believe. And so I was really stricken by the thought of ableist language and how to actually flip it on its head. How do I change the perception of Filipino PWDs through, okay, demystifying or breaking the barrier that is built by ableist language? Since my undergraduate, I've often said, what is politically correct for us, and how can we put a more supportive language in place? Personally, in the Philippines, people often forget to put the person first before the disability. We often say, or we often slip and say, disabled person instead of person with a disability. Of course, we would also be dealing with slurs or the jocular use of physical disabilities in conversations. In our dialogues, we often refer to people with disabilities as people who are less instead of more, or at par with the abled person. We would often use derogatory words such as, uh, forgive me for using this in this context, but for the sake of giving an example, we would often say that someone would be retarded or stupid or crippled or dumb, okay? And when we say it in our own language, it is far more insulting. Yet, the Philippine society, okay, is numb to that kind of usage, to the point that they think that it is jocular in nature or used as a joke, instead of really understanding the effects this has on the population they are trying to, in a way, insult. So the language is very ableist, to the point also that we use mental disabilities, or yes, mental disabilities as jokes in my country. And I feel very sad to be saying this, but since I'm trying to uncover the truth of what it's like to be a person with this disability in our country, so that we would know, okay, and raise awareness about it, I really have to say that. I've provided narrative articulations or short stories um, from people who have actually lived or have lived experiences of disability. So I've interviewed them and used their stories here. So let's look at the ableist representation here. How is ableist language used in this particular articulation? So this particular narrative comes from M. I'm not going to drop the name of the person for the sake of privacy, but let's call her M. And M is a mother taking care of her son who lives with autism. So I interviewed her and I asked her how ableism has affected her life. And she said that ableism had given the fact that her son, okay, has autism, has given her or caused her to live with her own depression and PTSD. So she told me, and I quote, "Given my depression and PTSD, I was often told that I was crazy or psycho." So from this example alone, friends and co-advocates, we could actually see that words like crazy, psycho, stupid, retarded, autistic, disabled, or crippled are easy insults to give anyone in our society. And it is quite rampant in my country. So this mother who's taking care of her son is called crazy or psycho because of her existing conditions caused by her son's living with autism. But we could see here how loosely the ableist language is actually employed. There is also a lack of tact when dealing with children with disabilities in schools. Personally, when I was younger, I was also a target of a lot of bullying and ableist language. I would be called slowpoke, okay? Because I have cerebral palsy and I was called slowpoke, okay? And I was told to fly if I could not walk properly. So even though I was a child back then, and children my age were telling me this, okay, it is caused by a lack of education and empathy on the part perhaps of their parents. So this is also a reality um, in children's lives today. Okay. Aside from ableist language, we also have limited insurance coverage and expiring PWD cards. So a person with disabilities or pre-existing conditions or comorbidities runs the risk of not being fully insured when applying with certain insurance companies, because the insurance company protects itself from spending too much. So even though there is a law that should safeguard the well-being of each person, either abled or disabled, okay, some life insurance companies would put a PWD on the fence if they are found to have pre-existing conditions. So the insurance coverage is not adequate. What really shocks me actually is not only that, but the existence of an expiration date on the PWD cards. As I actually discussed earlier, there is a mandate that each PWD, okay, will be given a PWD card that entitles him or her to 20% discount on essential purchases like food, medicines, and anything else that they might need for their own conditions. However, the funny thing is, and I choose to see it as funny because, well, I really don't have a choice, is that these cards expire in 3 years, despite the fact that most PWDs have lifelong conditions. Okay, so no matter if your disability is permanent or very transient or passing, okay, or not really permanent, you would have to, okay, renew your PWD card every 3 years. And for me personally, that is a huge inconvenience on my part, and I'm sure on the part of other Filipino PWDs. Third, and I'm sure this is very, 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 very common, not only in my country, is the inaccessibility of things in the Philippines. As you all know, the Philippines is a third world country. However, these problems of accessibility or equity are actually rather still age old, no? Parang they are not solved. So the issue of the absence of ramps, defective elevators and escalators is a huge one in the Philippines. Most often, officials of public places pay no heed to these problems. Tenants living in apartment buildings with no or stalled elevators are forced to walk flights of stairs when they need to go out. The scenario depicted here is of a man walking up the stairs in the train station because of the fact that the elevator of the train station had stalled. And despite the fact that there have been many complaints on the elevator, it had not yet been fixed. So the things that would help us, PWDs, to walk around or to walk around in society, okay, or to get around in the world, okay, are not given to us. Okay, so we, with limited bodies, would have to act as though we are actually able enough to walk that long flight of stairs. So this is a big problem. Often, this problem also translates with the issue of parking slots reserved for PWDs. And I know that this is also rampant in other societies, but in my country, people pay no heed to this. Okay? Parking slots reserved for PWDs are taken by those who are able-bodied, or the family members of PWDs take advantage of the privilege of having a relative with a disability and park there even though their relative expressed that he or she would like to walk like the abled crowd. So you can see the ableism here, no? The fact that the boundaries are not respected, the fact that even though some PWDs would actually want to walk like the abled crowd, their relatives exploit their PWD status for special privileges. So you could actually see the interpersonal ableism coming on here. And the fact that people have become ignorant to the signs that would actually, or that are actually put there to protect the welfare of the differently able. Next, we have lack of accommodations in schools and workplaces. So this talks about, or this is very rampant in the Philippines, because even though we try to be an inclusive society, there is still a lot of discrimination against PWDs in terms of employment and in terms of vocational securing. Okay, so I have two examples here of PWD stories. First, let's look at the case of K, a 28-year-old man with a mild cerebral palsy who was denied a job he was clearly qualified for due to the fact that he had a disability. The jobs I apply for, he says, always go to my able-bodied counterpart. So even though people in Philippine society say that they are inclusive, there is still a very rampant stigma on the PWD community, because no matter how much we fight, okay, sometimes we don't get to sit in the tables, or we don't get to sit in the company of our able-bodied counterparts, because people in the workplace don't trust that we have what it takes to perform at par or even beyond their standards. A second case, Z, a 23-year-old woman with glaucoma, claims that she was denied regularization at her job because she was thought to be blind. They refused to give me the job or the regular position, she says, because they thought having glaucoma meant I was blind, even though they saw that I was still able to see perfectly. So this particular respondent, okay, Z, is a classic example of how ignorant society is of people with disabilities in the Philippines. So just because Z runs the risk of going blind in the future because of her pre-existing condition, she was denied the opportunity to be employed in the present, okay, despite her qualifications. So even though, as I discussed earlier in the Magna Carta, they are lobbying for equal opportunities of employment, there are still many situations where the PWD is not represented well and is not given equal opportunity. I would like also to talk about the government's stance or lack of support when it comes to providing accommodations in the workplace for the CWDs now, or the children with disabilities. So when we say CWDs, that's in my country at least, children with disabilities. So earlier last year, the DepEd, or our Department of Education, sent out memorandum or an announcement or a statement stating that there was no budget for the special education program. And when this came out, my country, or those who are advocating for equal rights for PWDs in my country, really went ballistic, and I was one of them. So you would see the backlash on social media and people trying to contact the Department of Education, asking them why this discrimination was taking place. Advocates like myself were um, were asking why this was happening, and also those involved in the healthcare industry taking care of these children, the developmental pediatricians, the rehabilitation specialists, they were all taking the social media to actually combat this. So the sad reality is that perhaps, the sad reality in my country is that there is little to no budget in the Department of Education to fund the special needs of our children. Fifth, of course, is the bullying and isolation. And I think this goes hand in hand with what I was discussing earlier about, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait, let me just find it again. I'm sorry. There. All right. This goes hand in hand with what I was talking about earlier. Okay, about the fact that there is no disability awareness, or there is no care. There is limited care for children with disabilities, and this would also have to do with the bullying and isolation that the children would actually experience. So the children with disabilities are often kept out of the playground and they're isolated and bullied by their peers. Well, this is very age old, no? And I have a narrative here that illustrates this reality coming from a respondent named T. And she says to me, my son is not allowed to participate in the set extracurricular activities in the morning since his functionality and classes are for the afternoon. So she is also, just like my example earlier, a mother of a child with autism. Number 6, there is a lack of access to affordable healthcare. In the Philippines, PWDs in the provinces often don't have access to adequate and affordable healthcare. This leads to late, false, or no diagnosis at all, and in turn, a poor prognosis for people with disabilities and illnesses. So as you can see in the 3 pictures I presented in this slide, okay, I actually went on a trip to look into the lives of Filipino PWDs in the province. Particularly, this is my province where I'm from in the Philippines. It's a province called Pampanga. And I went on an immersion trip to see what life is like for people with disabilities there. And the stories I heard of how they live there had a lot to do with their lack of access to affordable healthcare. A mother told me about how, for example, her daughter did not have access to physical therapy and therefore was left to just regress in her condition. And a grandmother also told me about how her nephew with cerebral palsy, okay, was diagnosed very late and did not have or does not have access to healthcare professionals. Okay, and for me, being a person with a disability, being a person with spastic diplegic cerebral palsy, that also hurts me because I know that in cases like these, in pediatric cases, early detection is key. Yet, the state, okay, does not do anything for these families and their PWD relatives. I'm sorry again. Now, having shown you the situation in the Philippines, okay, how do I think we can change this around? How do I think we can cripple the crippling ableism existing in my country. First and foremost, I believe that we start from the ground level and increase disability awareness by empowering PWDs to speak for themselves. I know that in our community as PWDs and advocates, the word increasing awareness and the responsibility to increase awareness has become rather monotonous and humdrum. Um, Personally, as an advocate, I'm always asking myself, when exactly is the increase of awareness going to do much of anything? When exactly is this increasing of awareness, this responsibility to increase awareness going to end? Do we really stop at awareness? But, okay, the the truth still remains that we have to start from the ground level. And as advocates, we must never tire of increasing awareness. And before I proceed, in line with that, I'd like to once again thank the organizers of this event, this global summit, for allowing me to shed light on the realities that we face here in the Philippines. Next, to provide more platforms to promote disability visibility, particularly in my country, change the language surrounding disability. Personally, as a person of words and a person of languages, as you might have seen through my presentation, I have a lot to say. I believe that language has the ability to shape or break a society. And personally, in my country, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do in terms of changing the views of people and changing the language that surrounds disability, changing how we approach people like us. Number 4, and I'm very passionate about this, to make the PWD card a lifetime privilege that does not need to be renewed for those with permanent disabilities. I believe that it is, while it is the job of the advocate to speak up for the behalf of the minority, it is also the job of the state to meet the minority where they are. And the PWD card changes many lives. But to make it a lifetime privilege for those with permanent disabilities would totally end the ableism that surrounds this privilege. It is not a privilege if there are many barriers to acquiring this, or there are many needs to be fulfilled in order to keep the privilege that comes with this card. Next, number 5, make infrastructure more accessible to PWDs. Another sector that can help us to do this is the architectural sector or the infrastructure sector. To be perfectly honest with you, the infrastructure in the Philippines is not really friendly to people like me. I have had to endure so much just walking around my university campus, for example, or walking around the bus stations and the train stations or in the streets. Okay, so we need to make infrastructure more accessible, build more ramps, build more elevators, and make sure they are functional, build more escalators, build more wheelchair elevators as well. Number 6, the government should also shift in perspective and prioritize the needs of PWDs. The fact that we have little to no funding for the SPED curriculums in my country is heartbreaking, because it is as though we are telling these children who have had to face so much being different in their lives that they don't truly matter in our society, and they do. Children with disabilities become adults with disabilities, and if we nurture them right, we can actually allow them to advocate for themselves and even make change in this world. But if the Department of Education does not allocate funds for the betterment of special education programs in the country, then sadly we will be at a loss. So we really have to allocate funds for the betterment of SPED programs. Number 8, and this is very, very important, because we cannot change any of the things that I just mentioned without creating awareness and providing disability education in schools to promote a culture of inclusion. Starting from the ground level, starting with able-bodied students, able-bodied children whose minds and brains and perspectives are malleable, will allow us to form citizens of the future who have empathy for those who are different, instead of apathy for those who are different. If we can teach children to respect PWDs, we are teaching the future of a nation to respect PWDs. And that in turn will give a better world, or will allow for a better world where people like me and the children I've talked about in this presentation to exist. We should not only limit disability education to schools, but also expand this initiative to those who might want to learn about it, or those who might need it, so that we can increase the empathy not only of children, but also of adults. And then we can change the language, and then we can change the way people see us. Language changes perspectives, but education gives way to change both of these. I'm nearly done. Oh no, in fact, I think I'm done. Oh, there. I'm so sorry. Number 9, we should provide psychosocial and financial support for families of PWDs to help them cope with the strain, demands, and needs that come with caring for their relative. Those who are in the provinces or in areas of need should be given preferential option. Just because you were born into a low economic stature does not mean that you are or should be denied resources. We should also acknowledge that disability is a psychosocial phenomenon, in that it does not only affect the mental health or the mental well-being of the person with the disability, but also it affects the mental health and well-being of those involved, the families, the healthcare workers, the caregiving communities. And in order to safeguard their well-being in dealing with the demands of this, we should be able to provide psychosocial and financial support to these populations. disability is a phenomenon that affects many, many stratas of society, and we should aim to cover them all and protect them all. Number 10, in conjunction with the ninth goal or the ninth recommendation, the provision of affordable healthcare to PWDs in marginalized areas. Aside from psychosocial and financial support, affordable healthcare is also very important. Affordable healthcare will allow us to have early detection of possible disabilities that befall children. And as childhood is a formative area of a person's life, then this detection will mean a lot to the person involved. It will mean that it can determine the outcome of his or her own life. So to provide affordable healthcare to PWDs in marginalized areas of the Philippines. This can also be done through medical missions. There are many other recommendations as to how to cripple ableism, but in my country, I think we have a lot of work to do. And so therefore, I think personally, as a person with a disability, a woman with a disability, a scholar with a disability, an advocate with a disability, we have to start from the ground up. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, and I thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I hope that you have learned much from what I've had to say. Maraming salamat at mabuhay. Thank you very much, and may God bless you all.